Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I have a disclaimer. The views of the guests that you hear in this interview may not represent those of the station or the host. Always seek your primary care physician consultation about medical advice. I always recommend that. Folks, I have two special guests today. They are twins. They are brother and sister, and they wrote a book together, and I'm going to tell you about them. I have Dr. Perry Zurn with me, who is an associate professor of philosophy at American University and the author of Curiosity and Power, The Politics of Inquiry. And I have Dr. Dani S. Bassett with me. She is the J.P. Skirkanich Professor of Bioengineering at the University of Pennsylvania and received a MacArthur Fellowship in 2014. They also have authored more than 300 scientific research articles in neuroscience, physics, network science, and complex system science. They co-wrote the book and authored the book, Curious Minds, The Power of Connection. I want to welcome Dr. Perry Zurn and Dr. Dani S. Bassett to Chatting with Betsy.
Thanks so much for having us.
You are welcome. I have to say, I love the cover of your book. I know I'm on audio, so people can't see it, but I'm into book covers, and I just love how you have the butterfly, and to me it looks like a dog is the hunter, and the person as a dancer, and just the connections and the lines and the dots. I love it. But going to ask you both, what I always ask my authors is, what motivated you to write this book, Curious Minds, The Power of Connection?
Yeah, I think typically Dani will begin to tell the story. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in and just say that there were many things that motivated us to write the book, but I wanted to give a little bit of a perspective on where the science of curiosity is right now in the field, because I think that helps to frame why this collaboration is so timely and for us so exciting. So for people who have been working in the science of curiosity for the last several decades, we've done a lot of work, we've found some things, but the story around what's happening in the mind when people are curious still remains pretty muddy. And many investigators or scientists have sort of begun to think that maybe we don't have a good definition of curiosity. Because if you don't have a good definition of something, then it's very difficult to construct beautiful scientific experiments to study that thing. So if you didn't really understand what a planet was, it would be difficult to run experiments to further understand planetary motion. Similar thing with curiosity. If we don't really understand what it is, it's hard to develop scientific experiments that can push the field further. So this notion that maybe we don't have a great definition of curiosity happened right around the same time that Perry and I started talking about curiosity together and its relation to learning. And so I thought, well, maybe it's possible that if we turned to philosophy, which is Perry's field, we would be able to get greater clarity on what curiosity really is. And then we could bring that back into science to help us do our experiments better.
Very interesting. And I read, in the beginning, you were both homeschooled, and your mom encouraged you to be curious and to go find the answers. Which I had a question. Did you find, because I found this when I was growing up, but I'm 65, so teaching in school is much different back then, that is homeschool, does that allow for more creativity and curiosity in children than the typical academic setting in school?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly, for us it did. Homeschooling looks different depending on who's doing it. there's a lot of variation in how homeschooling looks, in the same way that there's a lot of variation in how traditional education may look. But for us, and the way our mom organized our learning, it was incredibly good at facilitating our curiosity, a curiosity that was wide-ranging and able to dig in deep, but also stretch to understand things we couldn't even conceptualize at the time. It was just a wonderful experience. We're very happy to have grown up homeschooled.
I have to ask you both this. As a brother and sister, I know sometimes there's disagreements, and so how did you both decide what you were going to write? How did you decide who's going to write what chapter?
Well, we definitely we take turns writing the different chapters, and as far as our I think we've been good at taking turns overall in life at different things. We really appreciate each other's background and each other's expertise. And then as far as agreements or disagreements, Dani, I don't know if you want to weigh in here.
Yeah. So we didn't have a lot of disagreements as we are going through. I think that I was very motivated to understand the philosophical perspective. And I think similarly, Perry was really motivated to understand the scientific perspective. I would say that in the first version of one of the chapters, I wrote a lot about scientific truth. And as you can imagine, if you write the word truth and then have a philosopher read the text, the philosopher is going to question whether that's really truth. So that's one place where the vocabulary I was using definitely changed following his input. I was much more careful about the use of that word, or changed it to knowledge instead. So I think that that's an example of where the way that I have been taught as a scientist is really quite different than the way that he's been taught as a philosopher, and I can learn to question the way I've been taught, and what words really make sense to use in this context. But as we've been writing together, I would say that, now when you read the book, I think you can see that our voices blend really beautifully, and for most of it, you can't really tell who's writing it.
Yes, I agree. I feel that, when I was growing up, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s, I was curious. It's kind of like a morbid curiosity. I always wondered what happened to someone when they died. I know I was fixated on that. But I think when I was younger, curiosity was kind of squashed. Here was this way of learning. You didn't question it. You couldn't be creative. I'm glad to see now that they are encouraging children, and I would hope so, to be creative in their thinking. There's more than one way to fix something sometimes. There's more than one way to think of how a process works maybe. And, there was always, I was told, Betsy, curiosity killed the cat. How do you feel as a philosopher and a scientist when people discourage children from their curiosity, which I feel is so normal for them?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we do over and over say that, I think curiosity is natural for children, but also for all humans, and not just humans. So I think curiosity is one of these capacities that stretches across species lines, and that certainly stretches across the age spectrum of human life. So the question really is, how can curiosity be facilitated more in all walks of life and at all ages? So a lot of the folks that we talk to are really concerned about, for example, workplaces, and how workplaces don't really facilitate curiosity or creativity among employees very well at all. So I think that there's, we might talk about a crisis in education, but we could also talk about a crisis in other, in employment, such that
Sure.
adults are not expected to be curious. And that's concerning. And that's going to, restrict the kind of fulfillment that adults find in their own life as well.
Yes, that's a good point, Dr. Perry, because when I worked as a licensed practical nurse. I asked questions, and that was frowned upon. I was actually called stupid because I asked questions. Well, if something's not clear, doctor's order's not clear, you better believe I'm going to question it. And I just think that it should be encouraged in the workplace. But oftentimes, you're right, it is frowned upon, being creative and curious. I am very curious about so many things, and to me, the brain just is like, to me, it's like Alaska. It's like the last frontier. There's so much they don't know about the brain. But yet if we retain, I believe, if we retain our curiosity and learn new things all the time as we age, that our brains will be in better health. I'd like to know your opinion, both of you, about that.
You know, I think Dani's work, especially as a neuroscientist, is relevant here. Dani, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the neuroscience around curiosity is really fascinating. Let me back up a teeny bit to give you a bit of the history. So what people have initially hoped for is that there might be a particular piece of the brain that is the curiosity piece, right? And then if we could find what that curiosity piece is, then every time somebody is curious, then we would see that region of the brain sort of light up. And we could make some really nice connections between whether somebody is curious and their, let's say, degree of happiness or other factors in life. However, as we've been doing studies, we've realized that it doesn't seem like there is a single region of the brain that is the curiosity piece of the brain. But the curiosity is much more complicated than that. It requires a lot of sub-processes like motivation. I'm really motivated to find this piece of information. It requires attention. I'm going to maintain my attention to ask this question and to pursue the questioning, the line of inquiry. It also requires senses of reward. So when I do find the piece of information I'm looking for, I can feel something good in my brain, kind of happiness that I have found that piece of information. So the way that curiosity right now, as we understand it, works in the brain is that it requires these multiple different sub-functions to be present and to be communicating. So it's a beautiful kind of networked or orchestrated cognitive function, unlike something like audition or so hearing, which is really much more focused in a single piece of the brain.
Oh, thank you for answering that question. I have to ask you both your opinion on this. You know, back in the Stone Age when I was growing up, I had to look things up. Encyclopedia, go to the library, look up in those index cards. And now I just, anyone could go to Google and you could go on the internet and it's instantaneous, which I love. I've learned so much. Do you think that just going on Google and it's just there hinders someone, or do you think it's better if, like the old way, like how I was brought up, where you have to actually look things up and do the research? It's not instantaneous.
Yeah, I think, it's certainly faster to get answers to questions these days. Well, depending on the question. If the question is quite simple and straightforward and we have information to answer it, it's faster to get the information now than it was when Dani and I were kids or when you were a kid. But it's the quickness doesn't itself squash curiosity. I think curiosity requires this kind of time to kind of weave together and build connections between ideas, and that time can happen now just as much, so long as we're not kind of inundated with information. So if we always have the TV on and we always have our phones open, it's going to be harder to let curiosity do its work, where we kind of come up with a question, we mull it around, we start to piece together bits of information, right? So I do think that slowing down is good, but we can still have at our fingertips information that we'll need for the curiosity journey. It's just that we need more than that. We need more than information. We need time in order to weave together an inquiry.
Yes. I mean, like if I have a question or I want to look up some research, I could just go to Google. I don't have to go to the library anymore, which I find helps me. And I guess there's pros and cons, right, to both. In your book, you talk about the three different types or kinds of curiosity: the butterfly, the hunter, the dancer. Could you explain a little bit about each one?
Sure. I'll just speak really quickly, and then Dani's done some amazing research to fill it out, and so their work will be especially important here. But of the three styles, the butterfly is someone who loves to learn all kinds of information, right? In any kind of subject, wildly disparate from what they know already. The hunter is someone who's far more focused and really wants to know a lot of information about one or two things. They really specialize, and otherwise they're not too interested in much else. But the few things they're invested in. And then the third style is the dancer. And the dancer is someone who's really creative about their curiosity. They like to put things together that don't seem to belong together, right? And to ask questions that come out of left field and kind of say, well, what if and why not? And let's try this. So the dancer is again more creative, more imaginative in their styles of curiosity. But then again, Dani's work has been really helpful in kind of exploring these types.
Yeah. So
thank you.
We collaborated together to ask the question of whether those three types that Perry excavated in history over the last 2 millennia are also present today, or if you sort of were alluding to earlier, if Google and access to information has kind of squashed our curiosity or changed it in some appreciable way. So to address that question, we ran a study in collaboration with David Lyden-Staley, who's a professor of communication at the University of Pennsylvania, and together we had volunteers browse Wikipedia, which is an online encyclopedia, and they browsed Wikipedia for 15 minutes a day for 3 weeks. And what we were able to do then is to say, can we find butterflies? Can we find hunters? Can we find people who kind of fit in between? And the answer is yes. So we find people who are more butterfly-like in the sense that they move from web page to web page that are very different. So, for example, they might move from a web page about snails to a web page about the history of nothing, for example. So very, very different areas. And then other people would focus on one topic for the entire 3 weeks. So they might study poetics for 3 weeks, or we had somebody who read about Jewish history for 3 weeks. And so that's really interesting because it suggests to us that these styles that Perry found in history are also present today and still alive even while we're engaging in online informational resources. We also find that people tend to have one particular style but maybe change a little bit around that. So someone who was a butterfly on the first day of this study tended to stay a butterfly for the whole 3 weeks, but might move a little bit towards hunter or a little bit away from hunter. And similarly, somebody who was very hunter-like on the first day tended to stay like a hunter, but might move a little bit toward the butterfly or away from the butterfly. So that suggests to us that we may each have styles that we tend towards, but also flexibility to move among different styles.
I was going to ask if it's interchangeable. Can you be all three, maybe at different times in your life or even in the course of a day?
Absolutely.
Go from
yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've asked you about this. What type are each of you?
Yeah, I think I think we're both incredibly curious people, and we work across fields in a way that a lot of folks see us as butterflies, right? That we're interested in, obviously, physics and philosophy, what we've been trained in, but also, Dani's interested in bioengineering and neuroscience and astronomy and, psychology, and I'm interested in literature and the arts more generally, and sociology and anthropology, and then of course we're interested in each other's fields. So really, we're interested in everything. So I think we do get perceived as butterflies, but we're also, and I'll speak for myself, really focused researchers as well. We do a lot of very careful, very meticulous work. And yet, I think the heartbeat for me, and again, I would say probably for Dani too, is that we want to do creative thinking. We're not satisfied with whatever people have thought about curiosity or about any other thing we study in the past. We want to try to think something new, something different. So I would just say all three. I don't know if that's cheating, but
yeah, I would say something similar. That I think I'm a little bit of all three.
And how do you encourage someone who says, I don't think I'm any of these three. I'm not really a curious person. What would you say to someone to encourage curiosity? Because I just think to me, it just comes natural. But I don't know. Do some people not curious at all? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, Dani, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that we really feel strongly that everybody is curious. There is no such thing as a sort of non-curious person. But I do think, and we both feel that there are some people who don't know how to recognize the curiosity that is inside of them, in part because they may have had experiences in the past or through the educational system or through work systems that have squashed their curiosity or have suggested that their curiosity should be this way and not that way, or they should ask these questions and not those questions. And so actually that's one of the things that we really hope that this book does for people, is that when they read it, they have a new way of seeing and recognizing the curiosity that's inside of them already. And once they recognize it, they can spend time growing it and expanding it and sort of caring for it. And that hopefully will then lead to not just a better understanding of themselves, but also a greater appreciation for the diversity of curiosity in people around them.
And I'd like to ask you, because you have little ones, and my son is 38, what can parents do to encourage curiosity and model, to be curious and to be creative?
Yeah, I think it's really important that parents, first of all, become attuned to how their child is already demonstrating curiosity. So I think one of the faults of some parents and the faults of some educators is that they look for curiosity, forms of curiosity or behaviors of curiosity that they're really familiar with. So, if a kid asks a lot of questions and really gets into kind of pulling things apart or putting them back together, then they're curious. Well, that's not every kid, right? And so it's important for parents and other educators to get clear and get attuned to how the child themselves is demonstrating curiosity. And it might be in ways you never expected. So you just have to listen, you have to watch, you have to follow, you have to pay attention to learn how your kid is already practicing curiosity. And then simple task is encourage it, right? So if they're really into whatever it is they're into, help them do it more. Help them kind of expand their interest in that area. Or if they have a particular activity they like to do in which they're obviously demonstrating exploration, okay, give them opportunities to do that more. So it has to start with listening to your kids.
Yes, that's absolutely. You know how I feel, Dr. Perry and Dr. Dani? I think parents and educators should really encourage that. You know, it was so important back in the day to color in the lines, and you had to color, you know, the tree trunk brown and the leaves had to be green. Why can't they be a different color? Why can't you color outside the lines? It's not going to hurt anything. I have to tell this quick story because I want to show the audience, well, not show because you can't see, tell the audience how quickly a parent can squash a child. This little girl, and because I worked at a preschool, she had preschool all day. She's so excited to see her mom. She shows her picture. Her mom goes, "You didn't stay in the lines. Look at so-and-so's picture. They colored in the lines." The little girl's face, you could just see, just went zoop. She just crushed her. And I'm thinking, why couldn't you just encourage her creative way of how she colored? And I just think that's so important to, you know, hey, you want to paint the leaves purple? It's okay. Why not? Is that, what do you think about that way of thinking? Am I, like, right in that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Dani, weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that it's really important, again, as Perry was saying, to recognize how another person's mind is working. It's actually called, it's related to theory of mind, which is trying to understand how another mind is working. And I think that that's exactly what you're describing, which is that there is a way that the child's mind is working, and the parent or the teacher or the adult in the situation isn't seeing the way the mind is working and saying, no, you know, that's not the right way to work. You have to work this way instead. And that's problematic because it doesn't allow for the child to make the connections and explore the diversity of knowledge in the world in a way that makes sense to them. And so I think in truth we're significantly hampering their ability to connect with the world and to build accurate models of the world in the way they want to.
And, you know, I think this is my own opinion. We are to be grateful for those who have very curious minds. I mean, it's like, where would we be for the people who weren't curious? These people that were curious, that developed vaccines, that developed, Thomas Edison with the light bulb. They had to be curious, to me, to find out, okay, how can we cure this illness? And how can I make a light bulb? And different trying different times, and learning from each experience. Not see it as a failure. This is, I think, why people are maybe afraid to be curious and try things, because they're afraid of failing. And it's not failing. It's part of learning. And I wish parents and educators would encourage that. It's okay if you fail at doing something. You just learn from it. You learn from it and you go on. I wish people did that when I was younger. I really do. I hope they do it now, as the voice of wisdom here. How do you feel about that, like curiosity in the sciences as well as the arts, as the paintings?
Yeah, I mean, we do need more room for experimentation, for doing things differently, for failing. But just because you did something differently doesn't mean you failed also, right? We need to break those two things apart. And we talk about this in the book, but there are a lot of people with, for example, learning differences or disabilities or who are neuroatypical in some way, and it really matters for us, right, or have various social backgrounds that are different from others. It matters for us that the really diverse ways in which people get curious and practice their curiosity be encouraged in whatever context they're in.
Yes, I agree. And, talk about learning disabilities. And this has me curious because my son has a cognitive disability. And as a parent, it took me a while to understand that Josh can memorize. My son can memorize. He remembers things like I cannot believe. He would sit and memorize sports statistics, but yet he couldn't comprehend, like he loved to read movie reviews, but he couldn't comprehend what he was reading. So it finally clicked in my brain, which sometimes may be a little slow, that the teacher said to me, Mrs. Sloan, you can memorize something. That doesn't mean you understand or process what you were reading. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, wow. So I think we have to be curious and open-minded about how other people learn.
Absolutely. And this has, a lot to do with how the brain is structured. Dani, I don't know if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, it definitely does. It also, I also just want to kind of mention that there's a beautiful line of research that you would probably love, which demonstrates that people who have diverse experiences and come from diverse backgrounds tend to have strikingly innovative ideas. And interestingly, in the sciences at least, it's been demonstrated that if those innovative ideas have come from marginalized people, for example, from people with marginalized races, ethnicities, or genders, then those ideas tend to not be taken up. And that's to the detriment of scientific discovery in the future. So that's just kind of a very practical research-based observation that, if we want science to progress in the future in a way that can bring us discoveries faster and more meaningfully, then we need to be able to listen to the ideas of others that are quite innovative, even if they're innovating in a way that we weren't expecting. So it feels very, very.
And in that sense, I really want to think about your son and not say that he doesn't understand, but what is he understanding and how is he understanding? And maybe it's a kind of understanding that doesn't get a lot of attention or uptake in a classic classroom setting, but that there is a level of understanding and that it's simply quite different from the typical students around him. And what can we learn about that different style of understanding,
Yes, that's so true. And, even with, I can't help but bring up Alzheimer's because it's a subject so close to my heart. And just seeing, it baffles me. Like the brain just baffles my mind. And Alzheimer's baffles me. Like my husband was able to hum a tune, and yet he had difficulty saying words, and how music affects the brain. I'm really curious about that, and there's been research about that, how people with Alzheimer's, they listen to music and they just go back in time and they'll start clapping and they'll be interactive, and some of them even start talking. It just is fascinating to me. Really, the brain fascinates me.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, I think that Alzheimer's disease and many other conditions can certainly alter the stimuli that are salient to us. So in what you were just bringing up is that music becomes very salient. And in other cases, there are other kinds of information that become salient and important and valuable to us. So I think that those sort of brain differences, no matter where they show up, whether they show up in kids or in adults or in later age, are ones that allow us to see the world differently. And that's something that we can all learn from.
Yes, and I believe this, and I say this all the time. And, I guess this would have to do with being curious, because, people get the assumption because someone can't talk, they don't have the emotion. They do. They do have the emotion, and I strongly believe, and I've seen this, that I learned such a deep soul love connection to my husband like never before during his journey. And I believe that they feel our love. They may not be able to talk, but they know it. They know our voice, because hearing is the last sense to go, and they take our love with them. And I had to say that. It has something to do with Curious Minds, but it's just that, the like emotions. Well, yeah, I am curious about that, because even though they don't respond, they hear and they feel. And that really has me curious as well as to how much they do feel our emotions. And your book is so interesting. I have one more question, because you're underneath, it's a Curious Minds, the power of connection. Does curiosity connect us as human beings together? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Curiosity connects ideas first and foremost. So when you're curious, what you want to do is you want to connect a piece of information you already know to a piece of information you want to know. So we fundamentally argue that curiosity is about connection all the way through, right? But it's not just about connecting ideas to other ideas, or facts to facts, or experiences to experiences. Curiosity also connects people to people, and people around the globe, communities to other communities, different geographies to different geographies. So curiosity is this web, this really multi-level web of building connections. And to us, that's what's new and interesting about curiosity that we're sort of bringing to the table.
Oh, thank you. I so enjoy talking to you both, Dr. Perry Zurn and Dr. Dani S. Bassett. Your book is wonderful. I highly recommend it. I think this book, this is my opinion, should be given out to teachers, educators, young people, parents. This is to be in every school's library. And that's my opinion. And I'd like
to...
Thank you. You're welcome. Where can people purchase your book?
Yeah, people can purchase it anywhere they typically buy their books, on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or at the press, mitpress.com. They can feel free to look Dani and I up. So my website is perryzurn.com, and Dani's is Dani S. Bassett.com as well.
Okay, can you repeat Perry Zurn at? Can you repeat that, Dr. Perry?
Yeah, perryzurn.com.
Oh, .com. Okay, and Dr. Dani's Dani S. Bassett.
Yep. Also .com.
.com. Oh, that's easy to remember. I was gonna ask you for a website if you wanted to share that, folks. I highly encourage. This is just like the top of the surface. I encourage you to look up Dr. Perry Zurn and Dr. Dani S. Bassett and see the wonderful work that they're doing. They are amazing together and by themselves. And I want to thank you for both for writing this book and doing your research. And I just can't thank you enough for encouraging for people to be curious. Folks, Curious Minds, The Power of Connection, written and authored by Dr. Perry Zurn and Dr. Dani S. Bassett. It is a book you want in your library. And I want to thank you both again for coming on and talking with me today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. Folks, I want to tell you that the information about Dr. Perry Zurn, Dr. Dani S. Bassett will be in the blog that Jeannie White writes. Jeannie White is station manager and produces the show. Thank you, Jeannie White, for all you do. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, listeners, for listening, sharing. Please share the show to help other people. This is why I do my show, is to help other people, help you to have a better life, and by giving you resources, information. And when you share the show, you are helping me carrying on my husband's legacy. And it is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music. Appreciate it if you would subscribe and tell your friends about Chatting with Betsy, because I want to help as many people as possible. And I want to wish everyone a happy holiday season and a blessed new year. If it can't be happy, I hope it's peaceful. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because this would be a much better world if we all did that. Thank you again for listening. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.